Good afternoon. And we're back with... It's not, because see, I did the opposite yesterday, so I told you I'd be very disoriented this whole 4 days. I'm doing my best. Good morning. Good late morning. So just a few comments before we start. I have a list of speakers, and I want to reassure everyone that I'm going to call on you. We have this session and then 2 more after lunch. So I promise I will get to you, and you can all help me out by holding up your flags when you'd like to speak, and I'll write it down, and stay as brief as we can so we can get everyone in. But first, we're going to shift gears to introduce two opening speakers to get us started this afternoon. We've talked over the last 3 days about building new alliances to address root causes. We have said to ourselves, we in the human rights world have to accommodate these changing times and become more effective. So I'm going to introduce Alejandra Archeta, who came from Mexico just last night. She wanted to join us over the weekend, but has a new baby and had a little problem with getting here on time from Mexico, followed by Indria Firnida from Indonesia. And you have their bios, I won't read them, but I'm going to hand the floor over to Alejandra now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning to everybody, and I would like to thank the Carter Center for the invitation, and also I'm really honored to be sharing this panel with President Jimmy Carter. I never thought that I will have this opportunity, so thank you so much. And of course, I'm also really honored to share this room with all these colleagues. Some of them are really good friends. Julianne Lusange is one of the wise women that I always follow for advice. And I would like to start. I have 10 minutes, and I will try to be on time in my participation. So I was asked to talk about how to build alliances. And I think this is a very important question, principally because we are facing, at least as Mexico, this real threat about building walls, no, with President Trump. And I think it's a great opportunity to think beyond the box and to think how to build bridges, how to build alliances in front of all this violence and all the crises that all human rights defenders are facing in our countries. And I would like to start saying that, of course, I'm Alejandra Archeta. I am a human rights lawyer, and I am also a human rights defender with 20 years working on the human rights field in Mexico, and also trying to build transnational collaborations with other human rights defenders and other human rights organizations in order to achieve, as we said in Mexico or in my organization, transnational justice. I am also the executive director of the Project of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, PRODESC, which is a Mexican organization with doing the defense of economic, social, and cultural rights, specifically the defense to the right to land, territory, and natural resources of agrarian communities, but also indigenous communities in Mexico that are being affected by the presence of transnational corporations and also the lack of protection of the Mexican government. And the other part of our work is working in the defense of labor rights, principally the right of freedom of association and the right of collective bargaining with groups of workers that are trying to defend rights. The other part that we are also underlining is that, of course, I am also a feminist, and in our work we are all the time underlining the the importance of the presence of women in the decision-making mechanisms inside of the communities, but also when they are dealing with the authorities and the transnational corporations. So that is part of the work that we are doing, and building alliances, I have to say, is one of the most important elements in our methodology. We are not only doing the legal defense of these rights, we are also accompanying communities to be stronger organized, because they will be fighting for not only the lack of access to justice from the government, but they will be fighting economic powers that are transnational corporations most of the times. So I would like to also underline that in Mexico, we are facing human rights crisis, as probably in most of the countries that are present here with my colleagues, my other colleagues, human rights defenders. But now we can say that at least the official data from the government is saying that we have 26,000 of people that are being disappeared. We also have 7 women that will be killed every single day. Every single day, 6 or 7 women are being killed in Mexico, and are being killed only for being women. We have the feminicide. And the level of impunity is so high that only 2% of the cases that are denounced in front of the authorities are getting a ruling from the court. The other 88% are still on impunity. That is part of the challenges that human rights defenders are facing doing the work defending communities and also other sectors of the population. Recently, we had the visit from Michael or Michel First, who is the special rapporteur for the UN on the situation of human rights defenders, just in January. He was in Mexico in his first official visit, and he was trying to also underline the obligations that the Mexican government have for the protection of human rights defenders. And he was really worried about the situation, specifically that human rights defenders that are defending the right of indigenous communities, but also the right to the water and the right to the land, territorial, natural resources, and sexual and reproductive rights, and the LGBT community are facing. Those are the human rights defenders that are under more risk, and the Mexican government is not having the capacity to respond for the challenges that we are facing. And just to give you an example of how difficult it is to do the work that we all are doing in Mexico, is during that week that Michael First was in Mexico, one indigenous human rights defender was killed, Isidro Valdenegro. He was an indigenous leader in the north of the country who had around 10 years defending the rights of his community. And because all the death threats that he was facing, he had to leave his community and live outside in another community. After several years that he was living outside of his community, he decided to come back and visit his family. That night, that first night that he was spending on his own community with his own family, he was killed. And that was on the same week that the special rapporteur for human rights defenders was visiting Mexico. That is the situation that we are facing, not only in Mexico, but we are, as human rights defenders community, are facing. And that brings us the question that how to build alliances in the middle of this context, in the middle of violence, in the middle of the lack of access to justice, in the middle of the lack of real response from the authorities. And the answer that we are trying to build is organizing is one important element. Prodesc, as a human rights organization working in the defense of economic, social, and cultural rights, have the experience of had the experience of working with agrarian communities and indigenous communities that are defending the right to the land, territory, and natural resources against transnational corporations. And just to give you an example that could be an example of success, I would like to talk about the Ejido La Sierrita, which is an agrarian community based in Durango, one of the states in the north of Mexico. They have around 9 years fighting for the right to the land against transnational corporations, Canadian mining, who is violating principally their right to the environment and the right to water, and also now the safety of the entire community is being affected. We, as Prodesc, are been working with them in the legal strategy, but also working with them as a community to be stronger organized, to be aware about how to deal with the risk that they are facing, defending their rights, and also to understand that the an organized community will be always safer than only litigate the case. Part of the success that we have been building is we create alliances between the community and also the workers of the mining. In the beginning, the mining was creating this false divorce between workers and community. And as an organization, we helped to the workers and the community to identify that they are being affected by the same company, and the response for fighting against the injustice as workers, as a community, it will be always if they have the possibility to fight together. As we say, stronger together, they were always working together. Now we are working not only with the community, also with the workers. The community had achieved their first ruling from the court. They are now again regaining their land that the company held for several years. The community now have again their land, and the workers that are also helping the community are now in the position to bargain their collective contract, and they are also being successful in improving the labor conditions. So that is one example of how building alliances between workers and communities affected by the same actor is a possible and powerful tool against, again, injustice. But the other part is the community and the workers also supported by Prodesc create these other alliances with unions from Canada and the United States. The steel workers from Canada and the United States were supporting not only the workers but also the community to achieve some of the goals, and principally to bring attention from the Mexican government and also the international confederations of unions about how we need to build transnational alliances to improve the situation of human rights, even with actors that are not the regular actors that we are used to work with, for example, unions. And that is a perfect example of how this new era is bringing us new challenges, and we need to see outside of the box in order to create bridges, build alliances, and principally building hub for human rights defenders and building hub for workers and communities that we are working with. Thank you so much.
So this is what we've been trying to get to for the last 4 days, is what are some success stories? Because we need some hope and we need some strategies. And so now Indria will talk about your work in Indonesia.
Good morning, colleagues and friends. It's also being honor for me to sit here. Many thanks for the opportunity. I'm Indria Fernida from Asia Justice and Rights, based in Indonesia. I would like to share the experiences in establishing an alliance between different groups that include civil society organization and state agencies in Indonesia by engaging in one of particular program that improving policing in the country as part of a larger program to reform the security sector institution post the 1998 as reform era in Indonesia. The Indonesian police institution at that time, and still to date, were considered as the enemy of the civil society organization, although less despised compared with the military. Indonesia has been transformed a lot after the authoritarian regime collapsed in 1998. The reform process began with a period of considerable change on the political and legal system. However, we have a big challenge in reforming the security sector institution in line with the human rights standards and democratic principles. The impunity for human rights violation committed by the security sector has been almost intact up to now. My previous organization, the Commission for Disappeared and Victims of Violence, CONTRAS, was a frontline advocacy organization which promoting accountability and demanding victims for justice. We took various ways of advocacy, which include legal assistance, public campaign by working relatively good with the emerging free media in the country, networking with the different stakeholders, as well as organizing demonstration. This NGO, since this has been considered by many as the most critical human rights pressure group, particularly in revealing many serious human rights violations committed by police and military forces, and sometimes being labeled as an anti-government organization. Because of our work, mobs affiliated to military officers attacked our office several times, and even in 2004, the state intelligence body assassinated against our former director, Munir, who later became an icon for the human rights movement and the human rights defender in Indonesia. One of our work focus was to documenting and assisting victims of police human rights violation and also to demand accountability for those violations. Meanwhile, CONTRAS also monitored and studied the police structural and legislative reform, police independency, the relationship between police and other institutions. We've been regularly sending complaints to the police on their police brutality and violence. We also reporting the police performance to the public every year and using media publication in echoing our demand and raising awareness. On one hand, the police official in many cases denied our findings or statements, but on the other hand, they also invited us in meetings to provide input for their ongoing reform process. One time, we re-strategizing our work by engaging police in different way to advocate the police reform. We consider that the improved engagement with the police decision makers is also important for demanding state accountability. Therefore, while CONTRAS have the expertise and experience on specific theme for police reform, the strategy to build a critical engagement with the government is also developing. We agreed to have a strategy that we call critical engagement. We understood that the challenge of advocacy, the human rights violation, is to maintain impartiality and independency. Our critical engagement concept was to engage with the government institution, but still being critical by actively speaking out to the public about new serious human rights violation in the country. The strategy was further developed when Contrast received some assistance from Amnesty International. It was with Brian at the time, in a series of joint activities and programs. One of them was to organize some capacity building program for many NGOs activists across the country. Amnesty International, as a big international NGO, had many tools for this program, particularly their manual of understanding policing, which was specifically designed for human rights activists to strategize their role in the policing affairs. The initiative was also added when Contrast identified some good police officers, particularly in high-ranking positions, to discuss about our common ground in reforming the Indonesia police institution. The engagement took a while, of course, but it went relatively productive for Contrast. In one occasion, the second highest person in the police force made a statement saying that we believe that Contrast really want to assist the police on accountability process. We believe that Contrast really want to assist the police in enhancing their duties because you consistently sending complaint to us and asking on accountability process almost every day. Thus, the police also needs you to assist the institutional reform internally. They were willing to open a dialogue through meetings, phone calls, even text messages, to discuss or receive our complaint on particular cases of human rights violation by the police. Since then, Contrast was involved in some of the police international mechanism to discuss how human rights standards can be implemented in their performance. Eventually, they have, based on our discussion, they have their internal regulation on human rights implementation on police performance issued, although the implementation of the regulation has been far from the early expectation from us. Indonesian police also conducted series of meetings at the provincial level to disseminate their internal regulation by inviting us as a part of human rights expert and NGOs representative. While on the other hand, Contrast was also disseminating this regulation to other local civil society organizations as a new tool in monitoring police performance in the region. There were some challenges during the engagement with the police, of course. There were some of refusal from the police, some police officers in the existence of Contrast, because we usually criticize and against them in the public. On the other hand, some CSOs is also suspicious that Contrast would not become an independent and impartial as an organization working in the front line. However, we finally can prove that no different advocacy strategy that we took in dealing with the police. Contrast is continued lodging complaints on cases of human rights violation and criticize them publicly. It was a little achieved on this strategy. The other positive result was that Contrast has been regularly receiving more complaints from victims of their families. The credibility of its reputation increased and well accepted by the more people. Contrast has more access and get more response from the police for factual clarification on cases of human rights violation when demanding accountability from the police. Together with Amnesty International, we also discussed intensively on the role of civil society in the Southeast Asia, dealing with the security actors. The urgency of accountability is our common future in police reform program in the region. We share our experience and learning not only with the local NGOs in Indonesia, but also with other NGOs in Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, and Timor-Leste. On the other hand, the conventional strategy by involving international NGOs to advocate the police brutality in international level is also ongoing. Meanwhile, all this effort cannot guarantee the reform of the institution. In my opinion, the reform initiative from the police is not systematic. A good result coming from the police institution still highly depends on the individual leadership. We have difficulties to follow up the communication or commitment with the good cops when officers have to move to other positions. It also depends on the political context of the period of the time. Recently, Indonesian police becoming more politicized following the change of the government. The other big challenge is that the police is still one of the most corrupt institutions in the country. Even though we still follow a dialogue in the rules based on the international regulation, but we still struggle in demanding police accountability. The genuine reformation of police still need a long time struggle. Therefore, we always reflect our strategy and have to adjust it all the time and update the situation. Thank you very much.
Well done, that was very comprehensive and very
takes
helpful.
time.
And I'll revert to our list now, and I wanted to turn to Jin In to talk about the empowerment of women and girls as an important strategy.
Okay, I will get to it. My name is Jin, and I'm the founder of For Girls Global Leadership. It is not just an organization, but a social change movement to show the power of girls around the world. It is energizing to be with other human rights defenders because I know this isn't our lives every day. And I know all of us, or many of us, might have a President Carter story, and I do. The day that I came to the United States was actually the day that you were leaving office, unfortunately, and a new administration was coming on board. And as there was so much excitement and people were telling about this new president and the old president, I wondered actually at that time if I would ever get to meet the leaving president, and it is really an honor to meet you. And I want to talk a little bit from a personal perspective why it is so amazing, the impact of investing in girls and immigrant girls, because you will never know the result of it. And I know that not only actually a Sunday school teacher from a Baptist church who helped me and told me that I can be anything I wanted, words I have never heard from being born in one of the poorest countries. Now that's what I do and I champion, and I also want to let the UN and United States know that we are the recipient of one of the countries that went from one of the poorest to today to South Korea. And we are also reminded every day what happens when you don't invest in human capital and girls and women, and that's North Korea. So, I realize that this was under root cause, and I do want to highlight some and bring some truth to 3 root causes of why I believe this is happening, which might be something that many of us, we know, or maybe not, because now I speak around the world and I'm actually amazed at how many people don't know. I'm going to start with a very simple question. Do you believe there is more males or females on the planet right now? So just by show of hands, raise your hands if you think there is more males on the planet. How many of you think there is more females on the planet? Please raise your hands. More females. Okay. This is why I get to speak. You are wrong. In fact, there is more males, and if the extra males created their own country, it would be the 21st largest nation on the planet, similar to the size of France. And today we are actually seeing the greatest gender imbalance on the planet. And it is not an accident that the most violent places around the world is also the most gender imbalance, beginning with the Middle East. There's another reason why the violence and extremism is increasing, because it is directly proportional to violence against women. And so violence against women is not just an outcome. We now know that it's the cause. And the third root cause of why all this is happening is because the world is also seeing the largest number of young people around the world. In fact, we call this youth bulge. And many places, Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, everywhere, and interestingly, United States of America, the millennials have now outnumbered the older generation. So that is the grim truth right now. But I am actually here to bring a solution. And in fact, what I believe is the most powerful solution, a new alliance and a global sisterhood. Thomas Martin said that the root of all war is fear. And by working with bold young women and girls around the world, I have learned empowerment is fear transformed. And for those who don't like the word empowerment, I call it the can-do factor. These are young women and girls who never got the memo, they couldn't do it. So they are just keep can-doing it. In fact, my Bible school teacher that's what she told me when she was teaching me English. She said, Jen, the word C-A-N-N-O-T doesn't exist in your vocabulary. Last year, I was here to present to you the first ever global survey on women's empowerment of young women that spanned from Afghanistan and Zimbabwe. And for those who weren't here, we found out there were 3 critical factors to empowering girls and women. In fact, we didn't even use the word empowerment because it doesn't exist in any language except English. And the 3 critical components were education, experience, and interestingly, self-awareness. That was actually the core component in how girls went from I cannot do to I can. And today I am here to speak of a desperate population and the worst humanitarian crisis we are experiencing in our time. 500,000 people are dead and 11 million people are displaced, and every one of us is impacted whether we know it or not, and that is the Syrian crisis. And so these Syrian young women came to me and they said, we want our voices heard. Not only am I focusing on Syrian young women, but to help the UN and United States and everyone who wants to develop a new kind of army, we strategically focused on a unique and a very rare group, and that is young women who are still able to get an education. And in preparation for this forum, I actually wrote a piece for the Huffington Post. So I will summarize the results here, and this is of the first ever Women's Empowerment Survey of Syrian young women. And this spans, half of them were in Syria, the other half spanned nearly 20 countries across the world, including United States, EU, and the Middle East. And we asked questions like, do you believe your life can change? What do you need to make changes in your life? What is your vision of a better Syria? Who is responsible for changing Syria? And what is your greatest hope and aspiration? So despite the bloody war, which is only thing they have known in their adolescence and young adulthood, 96%, and this is without any training, no knowledge building, no education, 96% believe their life can change. And in fact, that's the reason why they're going to school and they're developing skills to actively develop themselves so that they can one day go back to Syria and create a better Syria. What is remarkable, again, and this is of the general public, they got no special training, 1/3 of them are actually actively aspiring to be a peacemaker. So there is your new UN army there. But the collective potential of this group is even more extraordinary. When we ask who is responsible for Syria, is it your president? Is it Western governments? Or is it the United Nations? 75% of the respondents said they are responsible for creating a better Syria. And in fact, that is the reason why they're going to school to actively give back to the country. And in fact, one of the young women wrote, I have the responsibility to build myself and return everything to the country to contribute to the next generation who I entrust will continue the development and advancement. But they need our help. Just like all of us, they cannot do it alone. And in fact, those young women who were able to make changes had a support system, beginning with their family. And in fact, when we asked, because the word empowerment doesn't exist in Arabic, when we asked, what do you think that means? They said it is the power of support to make women strong. So that is the conclusion of what I would like to propose, a new kind of UN army, a new kind of even United States army, and investing in the next generation of empowered women peacemakers. And that has become my life's mission. My life's mission has become to clone you, President Carter. I think we need more future Nobel Peace Prize laureates. And in this endeavor, I have learned it's because we do not value life as if it's our own. And if we valued every life on this planet, and in fact, Mark Twain said the 2 most important days in your life is the day you were born and the day you find out why. And Actually, when I was born, I lost my father almost immediately. And I found out that I too could have been one of the girls who will be killed or sold or left or neglected to die. But there was a group of women, most of them, who rewrote my destiny. And as my Sunday school teacher, unfortunately, as she was passing away, and I said, but Barbara, I want to save you. You helped me to be who I am. And she said, honey, your job isn't to save me. It's to reach back and pull all the girls just like you. So I hope that is the future that we can create. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Now I'm going to call on those who wanted to speak earlier. And I have Musa and Amr. If we can start Musa. You okay, Amr? Musa? Or if I have someone urgent that was on the list that would like to follow on this line. Otherwise, I have Olga and Sarah who had asked to speak. And I have Hayat and Henri. Okay, I'm going to start with, and Emily. Emily, go ahead, and then I'm going to call on Hayat and Henri.
Thank you. So my name is Emily. I'm from Amnesty International USA. We've been speaking about the rise of authoritarianism and the closing of civic space and the space to express dissent and to do our work. And we've watched with great concern as since the inauguration of President Trump, over 19 states have put forth legislation that would undermine or infringe upon the right to peaceful protest, including bills such as removing liability for drivers who hit and kill protesters as long as they exercise due care. And I'm sure you've heard about this rash of legislation on the federal level, also concerning rhetoric around paid protesters or protesters not having the right to express dissent at rallies for President Trump. How do you see this development in the context of the global shrinking of civic space? And what would you say to state legislatures that have these bills currently in play that would have a chilling effect on the right to peaceful protest and to express dissent?
That's a question? Okay. Can I save that for the end when we have questions and go to our speaker list? And Hayat was next. Use your earpiece because Hayat will speak in French.
Merci. Thank you very much. I want to thank President Carter to give us this opportunity to share our experiences, our issues, our problems. Fortunately, we are not alone, and we are sharing the same problems, the same issues, the same challenges, the same struggles. I just wanted to talk about our experience in Tunisia, which is very specific. We have finished our revolution. We are experimenting a change. We have given up on dictatorship. We have a democratic regime, but it was extremely difficult. We had to overcome a lot of challenges. And I'm in charge of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I also have to make sure that all the country is going to be unified. We have to face a lot of difficulties, a lot of challenges. And we have a problem, terrorism in Tunisia. And that's not specific to our country. It is international, unfortunately. But what is specific to our country is that our youth who took part into the revolution, and we are looking forward to a better world where more equality, more chances to do better, are totally desperate. They are suffering, they are unemployed, they are totally marginalized, and they have become easy prey for the extremists. And they have been, recruited by the extremists, and they are going to join the jihad in Syria, in Libya, and we don't have any will to stop this wave. Some Tunisians in our country are behind them. They support this behavior. They push them to go to Syria to fight. And for us, we have to teach our youth to do the right thing and to like life, to make sure they don't follow the dangerous path. I would like that we could face this problem all together. It is not our problem, it is an international problem. And I know that a country on its own cannot stop terrorism. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayat. Henri. I mean, pardon, not Henri, Père Clément. Sorry.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I am Father Clément. I am the Executive Secretary of the Episcopal Commission Justice and Peace, and I coordinate the mission Justice and Peace, Congo, Rwanda, and Burundi. But today I would rather share our approach, our strategy, and our alliances regarding the work of the defenders of human rights in this sub-region of the Great Lakes, which has been stricken very hardly by different and bloody conflicts. To understand the problem that is alive in this sub-region, we perhaps need to start in the DRC. The history of that country has been marked along these past 20 years by two major events. First, we have the political instability, with the consequence that there is a multiplication of armed groups, massive movements of populations, local populations slaughtered, civil, and sometimes under the eye of MONUSCO, the destruction of the family unit, namely with rapes as a weapon, a war weapon. And in the psychology of this people, the woman's rape is indeed the desacralization of her body and her exclusion. Yet the mother, she bears life, and when she's destroyed, a whole nation is in fact attacked and destroyed. Number two, we have the bad management and the bad allotment of the natural resources, especially mining resource and forest. These two aspects are the center, are the terrain of predilection for the violation of human rights in a rather massive way, I should say. With this situation, which compromises the future of a whole people, the Commission Justice and Peace has developed 5 major programs to contribute to the putting in place a state of law in the DRC, with the fair sharing of goods and responsibility and the respect of human rights. I would solely stop here for a moment to underline our strategy and our license. We have 3 programs. First, governance, participative governance. In this program, in collaboration with another commission of the Congolese Episcopate, we have put in place what we call natural resources observatories, because we have the highest number of violation of human rights in these areas. Our strategy was to create what we call local committees of participative governance. And in these committees, we find the local communities with at the head the chiefs of villages, the custom chiefs, but also the local authorities where there is any authority, because there's a part of the country which doesn't have any government. The state's authority is completely absent. And the third group that we are putting together is, in fact, the larger mining and forest companies, corporations. And with this framework, in certain areas of the country, we have noted a decrease in tension. Why? Because there's an exchange between the autochthonous population, the companies, and the local authorities to preserve the interests of the indigenous population, the local communities. And that starts to bear some positive results. And also for our alliances with outside partners. Here in the United States, we work a lot with CRS, which is the Episcopal Conference in the United States, which has helped us in our plea for a handling of natural resources, the Dodd-Frank Law Act. Thanks to these actions, the law was put in effect in our country, and we see some positive results already. But there is the new European legislation regarding the responsibility of the companies who are in the mining industries in conflict areas. And this legislation was attained with alliances with the usual partners of our Commission, which are grouped in what is called 6C in Europe, which is a great Catholic organization and group, but also with socialist group at European Parliament level. They have been very engaged to put pressure so that Europe can finally have a legislation which would be binding, compulsory in terms of management of natural resources, namely for mines, with minerals which are subject to conflicts, as we call them. That's our strategy, our alliances regarding governance on natural resources and forest mining. On site, what was the result? As of today, Katanga, which is the largest mining area in the country, we were able to get a label for these mines. If a mine respects and does not get children in the mine, if the militia with weapons cannot be close to these mines, if the environment is protected, and if they respect the requests of local communities, that mining receives a label clean. And this also attracts to others to sign up into this large cooperative, to name it like that. Regarding the other program, civic and electoral education, on these aspects, I must admit many things have been achieved since 2006 in partnership with, among others, the Carter Center, where we have alliances with all the other religious trends in Congo. You know that Congo is principally Christian. We have Catholic evangelists, but also the Islamist community is present. So we work with all the other commissions, and thanks to the support of the Carter Center, we have observers all around the country. And today, this commission is the largest mission of observation around the country, and we are invited to other countries such as Mali, Tunisia, and in partnership with the Carter Center. This is very positive, I should say. And I would like to insist on something that we have seen, the results of all the work accomplished since 2006. What are those results? In December 2016, President Kabila had ended his term. And thanks to this work and deep work, the people have understood what their future had to do with everything that was happening. And a woman in a popular neighborhood, which was, she was retired, but she was a member of the commission. I just want to finish with that. What did she do? Every day she was saying 10 days left for President Kabila. And every day in the morning, people would gather around her and applaud. And when there were only 5 days left, she was arrested by the information services so that she could not continue writing and counting down. So people locked themselves up in their houses, and every day they would say, Kabila, you only have 2 days left. And there they could not tear every door off. So you will understand there is a collective alliance work in place, and our major partner is the Congolese people. I thank you very much.
Thank you. We do need good news from the Congo, so thank you. And Sarah Brooks. And we only have a few minutes left, and I'm going to end with Penda. And then...
There, thank you. So thank you, Karen, and thank you, President Carter. My name is Sarah Brooks. I work at the International Service for Human Rights in Geneva, where we work to build capacity for human rights defenders and to advocate, as the Assistant Secretary General well knows, for the UN to be more accessible and effective and responsive to human rights defenders, including those in restrictive environments. It's a particular pleasure to be at this forum because not so long ago, I spent a summer working here at the Carter Center in the China program. And in keeping with that theme, I wanted to make this intervention. Just before we started the conference, there was an op-ed in the New York Times by Ai Weiwei. And he says, wherever fear dominates, true happiness vanishes and individual willpower runs dry. Judgments become distorted and rationality itself begins to slip away. He was talking about the censorship regime in China, but I think broadly that really does resonate with a lot of the conversations we've had here today. And in a conference on human rights defenders and freedom from fear, it's important that we recognize voices and experiences that are missing from this forum, both so that we can stand in solidarity with them and so that we can name a challenge, not only a challenge to the struggle of civil society in China, but to the repercussions of China assuming the position of a global leader. So I want to first speak to a fact as well as a counter-argument that often comes up, which is to acknowledge that China can deliver. If we look at poverty alleviation, China has lifted between 500 and 700 million people out of poverty. But as UN expert Philip Alston caveats in his report, we don't really know the exact number because there is no transparent data. This has also been accompanied, regardless of how many people have been lifted out of poverty, by high levels of inequality and a failure to ensure public participation and accountability mechanisms. But we're here to talk about human rights. And the last 2 years in China have been characterized by a sustained attack on human rights and on those who defend them. In July 2015, roughly 300 lawyers, legal professionals, and activists were detained, harassed, and questioned by state authorities. About 30 remained in extended detention. Today, exactly 22 months later, some have been released, although in exchange for forced confessions, televised. Some have been tried for crimes which were reclassified from picking quarrels and provoking troubles to endangering state security. In the last weeks, of the 5 high-profile lawyers remaining in detention, 1 has been tried by secret trial and will be effectively prevented from continuing his work for the next 8 years. Yesterday, in a trial announced with 30 minutes notice, lawyer and alleged torture victim Xie Yang pled guilty to inciting subversion of the state, likely under duress. Dozens of other activists remain in detention or under threat, including citizen journalists, Tibetan Buddhists, advocates for victims of forced evictions, and women human rights defenders like Su Changlan, or like transparency activist and independent candidate Liu Ping, whose case I first learned about that summer working here at the Carter Center. She was sentenced in 2014 to 6.5 years in prison for daring to stand for local election. But as we've seen from the conversations here and from our respective positions in organizations around the world, the influence of China does not stop at its borders. Chinese corporations, state-owned and private, extend their investment and operations globally, often with devastating effects on the environment, on working conditions and trade union rights, and on communities displaced by massive projects decided behind closed doors. Chinese security agents have disappeared activists from Burma and Thailand and have pressured Thailand, Malaysia, Turkey, and many other countries to refool asylum seekers, including activists, as well as ethnic and religious minorities. And at the UN, the government questions the legitimacy of UN experts, the mandate and expertise of UN treaty bodies, and the role of the Human Rights Council in clearly addressing country-specific resolutions. China, among others, are ringleaders in the NGO committee that you mentioned earlier, Assistant Secretary General. At the same time, they peddle human rights with Chinese characteristics. They close off all dialogue that is critical as unconstructive, and they dismiss the majority of civil society voices as biased and non-objective. In short, they advance a dangerous threat to the universality of human rights on the foundations of a UN system. Sadly, the UN struggles to respond effectively to this challenge at all levels. In a speech delivered at the Palais des Nations, President Xi Jinping gave remarks, and no UN official, not the President of the General Assembly, not the Director of the UN offices in Geneva, and not the Secretary General, raised concerns about the human rights record in the country. Independent NGOs and journalists were not allowed on the premises. And only a few weeks ago, the UN in New York removed a Uyghur activist from the grounds, allegedly at the urging of China, who see him and his organization as conducting terrorist activity for their efforts to claim their rights and to express freedom of religion and belief. So in conclusion, to talk in this forum about closing space, about threats to defenders, and about the future of human rights globally, and to not talk about the changes to come as China positions itself as a global leader in the vacuum already visible left by the US, we make a grave error. We do a disservice not only to the community of defenders in the country who can draw strength from our solidarity, but we do a disservice to the principles and commitments to universal human rights which we all strive to defend. I want to come back to the op-ed from Ai Weiwei in my conclusion. He says at the end of his article about China, but I think also sort of with relevance to us all, as things are today, rational resistance can be based only on small actions of individual people. And because I did want to end on hope, one of those individual people is Wang Qiaoling. She is the wife of a Chinese lawyer named Li Heping, and she has advocated constantly and in the face of surveillance and harassment, targeting her and her children for the release of her husband. And we got news just this morning this morning for us, this evening in Beijing, that Li Heping, who was the individual tried secretly last week, has come home.
Thank you, Sarah. That was important. So I have to ask an indulgence of two of our speakers because I want to give you more time and we're actually out of time. So can I move you, because I think you won't have enough time now if I call on you now. But Khalid has to leave for a city council meeting. Yay, Khalid got elected to city council, but he has to go. So can I give the final word to Khalid and then give Olga and Penda more time in the next session? Yes? Thank you, Khalid. And Musa in the next session. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. Yes, my name is Khalid. I am going to take this off. I am an organizer of the Atlanta chapter of Black Lives Matter. And a few years ago, I began to study previous movements for human rights, like the Student Nonviolent Coordinator Committee, SNCC, and role models like Congressman John Lewis. I saw the need to move from protests to politics. I'm wearing this shirt today, which is somewhat controversial. Says, "Don't let your new president get your butt whooped." But it's a youthful, more militant expression of the safety pin movement, which sprang up around the world as many Western democracies moved towards fascism. with Brexit and the election here of he who shall not be named. But I was actually scared to wear this shirt when I came on Sunday. I thought, like, in this august body of elders and leaders, that I wouldn't be welcome. And so I've spoken on this throughout the weekend, and I want to share with you directly today that around the world, the next generation of leaders is very skeptical about the credibility of so-called democratic institutions and their ability to make change. Seniority plays a powerful role, perhaps too powerful, both in government and in funding systems, from assigning cabinet positions in parliament to assigning funds, as Special Rapporteur Kai spoke of yesterday, based on deliverables. Sometimes we just place too much authority or reliance on seniority to the detriment of new voices. So making a space for young people means more than just putting us on the program. The austerity of this room, the way that everyone is dressed in their finest garments, even these can be psychological barriers for young people who, like me, may come in this room with a t-shirt and some slightly skewed principles, but the most innovative ideas. So I should note that it was actually Special Rapporteur Kai who, in a smaller session, encouraged me to have the freedom from fear to wear this t-shirt and to come into this space as my most authentic self. And so we have to find more ways to onboard young leaders without making them feel like they must assimilate, lest we lose that edge that sparks so many of us to become politically active. And lastly, I want to leave you all with this bit of hope. I will be leaving, as was said, to prepare for my first full city council meeting in the new city of South Fulton, which is just south of the airport. And I invite you all to come out. We start at 5 p.m. if you're, still here. But seriously, the key to winning the future in America, which will greatly impact policy around the world, is in the southern United States. So President Carter, I'm sure as you are well aware, the southern strategy of dividing working class whites and blacks, which began with men like Harry Dent and Strom Thurmond and Richard Nixon, and was perfected under Lee Atwater and Ronald Reagan, now continues under people like Steve Bannon and Trump. And one thing that makes them so effective, besides this myth that free market capitalism is a pillar and maybe even the ultimate expression of democracy, one of the biggest barriers are the policies pushed by conservative southern state legislatures. I won my race by running a campaign that was not based on personality or even issues, but actually I ran it as a political education campaign, which is what we used to do in Black Lives Matter, what we still do in Black Lives Matter. And people know what they need, but too often we don't know how to get it. We don't know how to work the machinery of our political system, which has just gotten a little bit too complex. But there is hope. Young progressive leaders like me and Chokwe Lumumba in Jackson, Mississippi, are educating working class people. So I just implore you, President Carter, and all of you to please support us here in the southern United States. Keep your attention and the attention of the world on us. Because as you and I know, bad things happen when people take their eyes off the South. But when we bring working people of all colors together, you know better than anyone, President Carter, great things can come from Georgia. Thank you.
That's a great way to end. So we're going to lunch, and come see me about being on the speakers list. I just want to make sure I have everyone who wants to speak. And Hadar Harris will be moderating the next session, so she'll get that honor. Thank you, everyone.